The Boeing B-52 Stratofortress entered service in 1955 as the United States Air Force's primary nuclear deterrent. 744 were built across 8 variants. On the opening night of Operation Iraqi Freedom, B-52HS flying from IAF Fairford launched the largest conventional cruise missile salvo in history. A single aircraft could carry 20 AGM-86CS. The Lockheed U-2 first flew in 1955 as a dedicated high-altitude reconnaissance platform for the CIA. Fewer than 100 were produced. U-2s flew sustained ISR missions over Iraq before and throughout the 2003 invasion, operating above 70,000 feet, beyond the reach of Iraqi air defenses. The Lockheed C-130 Hercules entered service in 1956 as a tactical airlifter. Over 2,500 were built across dozens of variants. MC-130 and AC-130 gunship variants flew direct action and close air support missions over Iraq. The AC-130U carried a 105mm howitzer and could loiter for hours over target. The Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker entered service in 1957 as the USAF's primary aerial refueling platform. 820 were built. Every fixed-wing combat mission over Iraq was dependent on KC-135 support. The type logged more flight hours in OIF than any other USAF tanker. The Sikorsky CH-34 Choctaw entered service in 1955. 0 were built for the Iraq War. The type was retired decades earlier. The distinction belongs instead to the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, which re-entered Iraq service with coalition partners. Iraq's own military flew ex-Soviet Mi-8 helicopters against insurgents, some captured and pressed into U.S. service as training tools. The Lockheed State Route 71 Blackbird was not used in Iraq. It had been retired in 1998. Its reconnaissance role was filled by the U-2 and, increasingly, unmanned systems. The gap left by the SR-71's retirement shaped U.S. investment in UAV technology throughout the 1990s. Jet-age combat aircraft. The McDonnell Douglas F-15E Eagle entered service in 1976 as the USAF's primary air superiority fighter. 483 were built for the U.S. F-15CS flew combat air patrols over Iraq. Though the Iraqi Air Force never contested airspace in 2003, most Iraqi aircraft were buried or fled to Iran. The McDonnell Douglas F-15E Strike Eagle entered service in 1989 as a dual-role strike fighter. 236 were built for the USAF. Strike Eagles flew precision strikes throughout OIF using lantern targeting pods and laser-guided bombs. The type logged more combat hours in Iraq than any other USAF strike aircraft. The General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon entered service in 1979. Over 4,600 were built, the most prolific Western fighter of the 20th century. F-16CJs flew SEAD missions against Iraqi radar sites on the opening night of the war, firing AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles. The Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk entered service in 1983 as the world's first operational stealth aircraft. 59 were built, all classified for years. F-117 struck Baghdad on March 19, 2003, the opening salvo of the invasion. The attack targeted a compound where Saddam Hussein was believed to be meeting with senior officials. The Boeing B-1B Lancer entered service in 1986 as a supersonic penetrating bomber. 100 were built. B-1BS flew from Diego Garcia and Al-Udeid Air Base, delivering more ordnance over Iraq than any other bomber type during OIF. The aircraft could carry 84 Mk-82 500-pound bombs in a single load. The McDonnell Douglas AV-8B Harrier II entered service in 1985 as the U.S. Marine Corps primary close air support aircraft. 340 were built across all variants. Harriers flew from forward operating bases in Kuwait, operating without runways, the only fixed-wing jets in Iraq capable of vertical or short takeoff and landing. The Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit entered service in 1997 as the world's first low-observable strategic bomber. Only 21 were built, at a unit cost exceeding $2 billion. B-2s flew non-stop from Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, round trips exceeding 30 hours, to strike hardened targets in Baghdad. The Boeing F-18 Hornet and Super Hornet series entered service in 1983 and 1999 respectively. Over 1,400 Hornets and 500 Super Hornets were built for U.S. forces. Navy F divided by a -18S flew the majority of carrier-based strike sorties over Iraq from 5 carrier battle groups positioned in the Persian Gulf and eastern Mediterranean. The Northrop Grumman EA-6B Prowler entered service in 1971 as an electronic warfare aircraft. 170 were built. No EA-6B was ever shot down in combat. The type jammed Iraqi radar and communications networks throughout the war. A platform designed for Vietnam was still the primary airborne jamming asset 35 years later, because no replacement had been fielded. Helicopters. The Boeing AH-64 Apache entered service in 1986 as the U.S. Army's primary attack helicopter. Over 2,200 were built. On March 24, 2003, a regiment of 33 Apaches attacked Medina Division Armor near Karbala. Iraqi forces used coordinated small arms fire to damage all 33 aircraft. One was shot down and its crew captured. The Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk entered service in 1979 as the Army's primary utility helicopter. Over 4,000 were built. Black Hawks carried assault troops throughout OIF and sustained the highest loss rate of any helicopter type in the war, primarily to small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades during low-altitude insertions. The Boeing CH-47 Chinook entered service in 1962 as a heavy-lift transport helicopter. Over 1,200 were built for the U.S. Army. Chinooks moved artillery, vehicles, and troops across Iraq's desert terrain where roads did not exist. The type also served as a flying ambulance, transporting over 5,000 casualties during the war. The Bell F-15E Kiowa Warrior entered service in 1985 as a scout and light attack helicopter. 375 were built in the D variant. Kiowas flew reconnaissance ahead of armored columns during the March 2003 invasion and later formed the backbone of urban aerial surveillance over Baghdad and Mosul during the occupation phase. The Sikorsky MH-53M Pave Low entered service in 1980 as the Air Force's long-range special operations helicopter. 41 were built. The type was the only helicopter capable of penetrating Iraqi air defenses at night in all weather with precision navigation. The entire fleet was retired in 2008, replaced by the CV-22 Osprey, before the war ended. Unmanned systems. The General Atomics RQ-1 Predator entered operational service in 1995 as an unmanned reconnaissance platform. Fewer than 360 were produced across all variants. Predators provided persistent ISR over Iraq for years before the war. By 2003, armed MQ-1 variants carrying Hellfire missiles were conducting strike missions, the first sustained armed UAV campaign in history. The Northrop Grumman RQ-4 Global Hawk first flew in 1998 as a high-altitude long-endurance unmanned reconnaissance aircraft. 45 were built for the USAF. Global Hawks flew over Iraq for 35-hour continuous missions, collecting imagery and signals intelligence across the entire country in a single sortie, a capability no manned aircraft could match. The General Atomics MQ-9 Reaper entered service in 2007 as a hunter-killer UAV. Production exceeded 300 airframes. The Reaper carried 4 Hellfire missiles and 2 500-pound bombs, triple the payload of the MQ-1 it replaced. Reaper strikes over Iraq and Syria constituted the majority of U.S. air-to-ground weapons releases after 2010. Airlifters and support. The Boeing C-17 Globemaster III entered service in 1995 as a strategic airlifter. 279 were built for the USAF. C-17s airlifted the 173rd Airborne Brigade Combat Team directly onto Basha Airfield in northern Iraq on March 26, 2003, the only combat airborne operation of the war, inserting nearly 1,000 paratroopers in a single night. The Lockheed AC-130U Spooky entered service in 1995 as a gunship variant of the C-130. Only 17 were built. The Spooky carried a 105mm M102 howitzer, 40mm Bofors cannon, and 25mm Gatling gun, more armament than many warships. AC-130s provided the only precision fire support available to Special Operations Forces during night raids across Iraq, with no equivalent in any other air force on Earth.